Okay, what if I told you that the most common piece of advice we get about money, go to school, get a good job, is actually the very thing keeping you poor? That's the huge, controversial idea at the center of one of the most famous personal finance books of all time, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So let's break down its core lessons and see what it's all about. All right, so the book kicks off by basically throwing a grenade at that advice we all get drilled into our heads. Go to school, get good grades, find a safe, secure job, right? But Kiyosaki says, hold on a second. He argues that this isn't just, old-fashioned advice. He says in today's world, it might be the single most dangerous financial advice you could possibly follow.
So, what does this all boil down to? Well, it's really a tale of two completely different mindsets, and they're represented by two very different father figures. The choice is simple, really. Do you want to spend your life working for a company, or do you want to spend your life learning how to buy that company?
Okay, so let's get into these two dads. The author Robert Kiyosaki literally grew up with two of them, which gave him this incredibly unique perspective. He had to look at two totally different ways of thinking about money and life, and then he had to choose a path.
And man, the contrast between these two couldn't be more stark. So his poor dad, get this, was his actual biological father, a super smart, highly educated guy who was the head of education for the state of Hawaii. But his rich dad, that was his best friend's father, an entrepreneur who didn't even make it past the 8th grade. And their beliefs about money, they were complete polar opposites on everything, from risk to what you say when you can't buy something, to whether your house is a good thing or a bad thing financially.
So what happens if you follow that conventional advice from Poor Dad? Well, according to Kiyosaki, you end up getting trapped in something he's famous for calling the rat race. And you know what the rat race is, right? It's that endless, soul-crushing loop. You get up, you go to work to earn a paycheck, you use that paycheck to pay your bills, and then you do it all over again. You think a raise is the answer, right? But then what happens? You get a bigger car, a bigger house, and your expenses just magically expand to eat up that extra money. You're running faster and faster on that hamster wheel, but you're not actually going anywhere. So what keeps this whole thing going? Well, it's powered by two really basic human emotions. The first one, and it's a big one, is fear. It's that knot in your stomach, the fear of not being able to pay your rent, the fear of getting laid off, the fear of just not having enough. That fear is what forces most of us to wake up every single morning and go to a job we might not even like. But then payday comes, and that's when the second emotion kicks in, desire. Or as Rich Dad puts it a little more bluntly, greed. You see all the cool stuff you can buy with that new money, a new phone, a vacation, a nice dinner out, and so you spend it. But all that spending just makes you need that next paycheck even more, right? So it locks you even tighter into the cycle. It's brilliant in a terrible way. Fear gets you to work, and greed makes sure you keep coming back for more. Okay, so how in the world do you break out of this trap? Well, the book's first huge lesson comes from a story about when Robert was just a kid, only 9 years old. He went up to Rich Dad and asked him, "Can you teach me how to get rich?" And let me tell you, the lesson he got was not what he was expecting. So Rich Dad puts young Robert to work in one of his convenience stores for a whopping 10 cents an hour. Can you imagine? He's dusting cans, doing grueling work for almost nothing. After a few weeks of this, he is just fed up. He's angry, he feels exploited, and he storms in to confront Rich Dad, demanding a raise. And Rich Dad, he just smiles. He tells him, "Good, now you're ready to learn." See, the whole point was to give him a taste of life, to make him feel exactly what most employees feel every single day. Rich Dad basically told him, that feeling you have right now, that feeling of being underpaid, unappreciated, and trapped, that's what runs most people's entire lives. And then he dropped a bombshell. He made a new offer. Keep working, but for zero pay. Nothing. Why would he do that? Because he wanted to completely shatter Robert's way of thinking about work and money. And right there, that's the absolute core lesson of this entire book. It's a huge shift in mindset. The poor and the middle class spend their lives working for money. But the rich, they figure out how to have money work for them. So how does this actually work? How do you make money work for you? Well, here's what happened. By working for free, Robert and his friend suddenly stopped thinking about that tiny paycheck. They had to, and it forced their minds to open up, to start looking for opportunities to make money that were, believe it or not, right there in front of them the whole time. But that's the big question, isn't it? How do you spot these opportunities, especially when you have absolutely no money to start with? Without a paycheck, they were forced to get creative. And the answer, funny enough, came from something they saw happen every single week at that same store where they were working for nothing. Okay, so here's what they did. It was brilliant. They noticed that the guy who delivered the comic books would just tear off the front covers and throw the rest of the comic away. They were perfectly good. So they asked if they could have them for free. Then they took all these free comics, opened up a comic book library in an empty basement room, and started charging the neighborhood kids 10 cents to come in and read as much as they wanted. They even hired their friend's little sister to be the librarian. Think about that. They created a business, an actual system that made them money even when they weren't there. And get this, their little library started bringing in about $9.50 a week. Now that might not sound like a lot today, but for two 9-year-old kids in the 1950s, they were rich. It was way, way more than they ever would have made working for 10 cents an hour. They had done it. They had actually learned how to make money work for them. All right, so this whole story, and really the entire philosophy of Rich Dad, can be boiled down to one single incredibly powerful rule. He told them if you can just understand this one thing, that's all you really need to know to build wealth. First things first, you have to know what an asset is. And forget all the complicated Wall Street definitions. It's super simple. An asset is anything that puts money in your pocket. Period. That comic book library, that was an asset. And then, of course, you've got the opposite, a liability. Just as simple. A liability is anything that takes money out of your pocket, things that cost you money every month, like debts or big expenses. And according to Rich Dad, that's it. That's the whole game. The rich just spend their lives buying assets, things that make them more money. The poor and the middle class, on the other hand, spend their money buying liabilities. And here's the kicker. They often think those liabilities are actually assets. And that brings us to maybe the most controversial idea in the entire book, and it's the final thought I want to leave you with. We're always told that our home is our biggest asset, our greatest investment. But let's use Rich Dad's super simple definitions. Does your house put money in your pocket every month? Or, with the mortgage, taxes, and repairs, does it take money out? Just thinking about the answer to that one question, well, that could be the first step onto a totally different financial path.